So let's look at the effect of tax on social welfare. Now, in this class, and in most of microecon, we're only focusing on per unit tax. It makes the math very simple because it's a very easy shift of the supply curve, and the results, is very the results is the same as if we do let's say a percentage tax, right? So by looking at a percentage tax, it adds more complications to the mathematics, but it doesn't really offer any more insight on the effects of taxation. Right? So now, there are two things, right, that we will use, or main two things take away from microeconomics. Okay, so and even if you don't remember anything from microeconomics, doesn't matter. Right, these are the two most important results from microecon. Right, is that one? It does not matter whom the government tax. The end result will be the same. Okay. Second, who the tax burden actually falls on, meaning who actually pays for the tax, will depends on the relative elasticity of supply and demand, right? Or in another word, market power of consumers and producers. Okay. Now, first, let's use the first fact. Now, how does that help us? So this gives us then a very quick way of sketching, right, of sketching total social welfare. Oh, but I'm not going to apply that yet. Sorry, I'm going to apply that in part B here. But right now, let's just sketch again the total social welfare. Now, when you do a sketch, right, what we care about is the intercept. Okay, and the slope we just care about if it's going down or going up. So PD, this is our demand curve. PS, this is our supply curve. Right? And so you remember from your algebra class, like 200, that is your intercept. So 200 is here, and negative slope, it just goes down. Right? We don't have to be accurate. It's not going to benefit us any. So as long as it's going downward, you're fine. Right? 20. That is the intercept of our supply, and it's +3, so it's going upwards. Right? So it's going upwards like this. So here's our demand, here's our supply. Right? And then so here's our equilibrium price, and here's our equilibrium quantity. Okay. Then our consumer surplus, that is that triangle, and our producer surplus is this triangle. And right now, right, we are assuming that nobody outside this market is affected. There's no tax involved here. So total social welfare just equals consumer surplus plus producer surplus, right? And we can calculate the area of those triangles a little bit later. Now, what about the effect of a tax? So if a tax is placed on the supplier, now because it doesn't matter whom the tax is placed on, and that's the results that your professor should have proven to you in microecon. Okay, we're not going to prove it here, right? But so the proof is done. Proof is available. Right? So we're just going to accept that outcome. Or accept that fact to proceed here. So then that gives us a very easy way to illustrate the effect of the tax. Now, this here says the $30 placed on the supplier. It doesn't matter, even if this says consumer, right? We will proceed and do the exact same thing, and that is we put a wedge. So we put a wedge of $30. So imagine, or just approximate, this is probably what $30 is. So that's the height of $30, and then that way we can draw these two lines here. So now this point, I'm going to call that PA, and this point here, I'm going to call that PB. Okay. Now the difference between them, that is $30. Okay, so it creates a wedge, $30 in here. Okay, the new equilibrium, the new market, the new market equilibrium. Right, I'm going to call that Q bar now, right, because here's the Q star. That was the old equilibrium, but because of the tax, quantity has decreased, and that will always be the case when you tax something. Right, you have less of it. Alright, and so quantity decrease, and $30 is the tax on each item times it by Q bar. So that will be this rectangle here will be the tax revenue, right? That government collects. Now, what is PA? So PA, right, is, I will call it the consumer price. right? Or the market price, because that is the price that consumers pay out of their pocket to obtain that good, right? Now, before there was only one price, but because now there's a tax involved, right, then the government takes their cut of $30. So PB is the producer price, right? Or the amount that producer gets. Okay, and so after that, then consumer surplus and producer surplus, then now are these new smaller, slightly smaller triangles. Okay? Now that the government is involved, our total social welfare, right, is CS plus PS, but also we're going to add the tax revenue as well. We're going to add that rectangle in the middle. Right? All right. So again, the reason why we can just place a wedge, regardless of whom the tax is placed on, supplier or consumers, we can place it here because of this result that you had proven in microeconomics. The end result is the same. Okay. Now, let's talk about what does it mean when we say who the tax burden falls on depends on the relative elasticity. Right? Here is the tax revenue, but who actually paid for that tax? All right. So let's illustrate that here. Right? So we said it depends on the relative elasticity. So here, I'm going to draw a market. I'm going to draw a market that the demand is inelastic relative to the supply. Now, how do I draw an inelastic demand? You make the curve of a very steep, right, or very straight. Right? So I'll make a straight line. I could make a steep curve here. Now, that's the demand, and I'm saying the supply is relatively inelastic. Okay, so inelastic means that the curve is flatter. Okay, so I'm going to draw something like this. Okay, so that is my supply. Okay, now I'm going to create a wedge. So here I'm going to place a per unit tax down here, and so here let's see what happens. Okay, so here there's my tax revenue, but I can draw a line from the original price here. Right, and here I'm going to zoom in a bit. Okay, now I have two squares. I have or two rectangles. I have the rectangle on top. I'm going to call that A, and this sliver on the bottom, I'm going to call that B. Now, what is A? Remember, A plus B equals the tax revenue, the total tax revenue. Right, that's the revenue, the tax that the government collects. But who pays for it? A is the burden, is the consumer. Consumer pays. Right? It's the amount that consumer pays. And B is the amount that producer pays. Right? The way you think about it is like something like gasoline tax. Right? Every one of us, most of you, will probably got gas before. You don't write a separate check, right, to the government to pay the gasoline tax. Right? You pay one price, and it is the gas company that writes the check to the IRS or in this case the EPA, right, to pay that tax. However, because gas is typically inelastic, right, the gas company can pass that on, right, can pass that tax on to the consumer. Right? So this is why California has the highest gas prices in the nation, because gas is inelastic, and so we have the most gasoline tax. So gas company just pass that tax on to the consumers. Right? So at the end of the day, the government doesn't control who actually pays the tax. It depends on the relative elasticity. I'll give you a different example. I'm going to draw the different market here where the supply is inelastic. The demand is inelastic, but the supply, the demand is elastic and the supply is inelastic. Right? And so to get an inelastic demand, I just have to draw a flatter, less steep curve. Okay, and then to get an inelastic supply, let me just draw a steeper supply curve. Okay, I can place a similar wedge here. There's my tax. Right, there's my tax, and those are the two prices again. And then now right? Here is the small sliver now is my A, and then that bigger part is my B. Now, okay, so again, same tax, right? But who actually pays for it depends on the relative elasticity. This is going to be especially important because we are going to be using tax policies to try to promote, right, things like less consumption of fossil fuel. But we have to be cautious and be aware of who the burden actually falls on.